All right. Shalom. First and foremost, I'd like to give all praise and glory unto Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shah Bahashem, Rakakwadash, and double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples towards young brothers, and peace and blessings and salutation to the hopeful lake out there pushing his word and truth and in sincerity across the four winds in the name of Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shah Bahashem, Rakakwadash, pushing to get up out there. Shalom to the hopeful elect, the believers, the listeners whom have came back to the obedience of the scriptures through faith in Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shah. All right, and what I want to get into with this lesson this morning, is dealing with, all right, walking in truth. Obedience, brings peace. Walking in this truth. And we know walking is becoming, is living this thing. You see, walking is a way of life, and as we begin to make the truth a way of life, as we begin to understand, because understanding is what really makes us become what we're teaching, because as we're teaching this word, we understand this word more, all right, we understand why we're doing what we're doing, so now there's a righteous motivation to do what we're doing, all right, because as we read and we understand, we're being more and more bought in into righteousness, man. Now, when you go to Proverbs 3:1, it says, "My son, forget not my law, but let thine heart keep my commandments." Okay? And we know that we can't keep the law perfectly, man. But this book is full of instructions, even beyond the 613 laws. This book is full of instructions and righteousness, man. And we apply everything that we can to our day to day. We apply as much as we can to who we are. Okay? So when you keep reading, it says, "For length of days and long life and peace shall they add to thee. Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them about thy neck, write them upon the table of thine heart." Yes, it said, "Let not mercy and truth forsake thee." Because as we, are becoming righteous, well, we understand the balance, of mercy and truth, and we begin to walk in truth, man, being honest. Now, of course, we're discreet, you see, and there's a level of subtlety that we should have in this world because we're behind enemy lines, okay? But in the general aspect, man, we're learning, how to walk in truth and honesty, and we understand the concept of mercy, okay? And it's all done in balance, you see. But we begin to walk in truth, man. We're becoming authentic, okay? In the world full of performance, we're becoming authentic in this thing, man. You see, and it says, verse 4, and this the point: "So shalt thou find favor and understanding in the sight, all right, of the Most High and man." You see, you read this in the NLT, then you will find favor both with Most High and people, and you will earn a good reputation, man. Because walking in truth and honesty, man, because first of all, dealing with wisdom, it gives us discernment on who to be around, how to operate when we're around different people, So there's level, there's a what you call as we learn wisdom, we become more sophisticated with this thing, okay? But just going back to being in general, man, walking in the truth and being honest, man, makes us have a good reputation amongst most people that we encounter with our day to day. Now, we know the propaganda of Esau, how he's going to push, and demonize the word, and we're going to be hated, But in our day to day, man, hey, brothers are beloved, man. You go to a restaurant brothers been going to for a few weeks, man, and when you go in, you see, like, man, they love that brother, like that, the way that they take him in, and by default, you with them, they take you in, and see, that's what the truth is about. It's not having a good name just for good name's sake, but a good name comes with doing right. You do right by people. Now, it's like I say, it's not a blanket. Okay, it's not how to word it. You know, you can't be that way with everybody. Sometimes you gotta withdraw. You know, wisdom tells you when to withdraw. You know, because say if it be peace, if it as much as lie within you, be peaceable with all men. Sometimes it's not possible. Okay, but then there's times where hey, you can. You see. So there's times when you know you gotta make the judgment call based on situation just to get out of there, man, just to avoid it. You know, or certain people just demons, and it might be friction, and it just But then for a lot of times though, man, just being, just living according to the scriptures, being thorough, being authentic, being fair, honest and just in every situation possible, man. Just doing that, it creates a good reputation because we're not doing it just to have a good reputation. We're doing it because it's the right thing to do. Okay? And there's a good reputation that comes, with that, man. You see? And when you, let's go here, because when you go to the book of the Colossians, because you can come, we come into the truth, man. We go through that phase, where we look at everybody, that's not in the truth. You can start to look down on them, look at them as less than because they don't know the truth, man. But as you mature, we understand that, hey, the Lord gonna have mercy on whom He gonna have mercy. There's certain people everybody's not meant to be on the highways and byways. Everybody's not meant, to be, on the coming board right now. There's certain people, that the Lord gonna have mercy on, just based off how they treated us, man. Certain people that the Lord will bring in later on to have mercy on them, make them get it, in the last minute or whatever. Okay, and just based on certain encounters they have with brothers, man. You see? So we come into that maturity to where, of course, you got 2/3, man. You got just wild niggas, the nigga woman, and, whatever. You see? And you can kind of peep with spirit, Jake in, the nigga woman in, and move accordingly, man. But then there's certain situations where, us being, us moving in the spirit, us moving in righteousness, us moving in fairness and honesty, just our conduct, and how people react to that, man. The Lord can have mercy on certain Jake, certain women. You see, it says this Colossians 4 and 5. It says, walk in wisdom toward them that are without, redeeming the time. Okay? It said, let your speech be always with grace, and those that are without are those that are not in the truth. So even those that are out the truth, we still move in wisdom. We can't have this, this hostile spirit just because they're not in the truth like we are. Okay? We got to walk in wisdom. We still at a certain level of, going back to mercy, man. The scriptures talk about let truth and mercy, be bound around our neck, man. So there's still a level, of respect, and consideration, okay, that you have, that we have, man, towards most people. You see? And it says, let your speech always be seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer every man. Now, let's read this in the NLT. It says, live wisely among those who are not believers, and make the most out of every. It says, and make the most. I'm damn bird. It says, let your conversation, slack it. Colossians 4 and 5, it said, live wisely among those who are not believers, and make the most of every opportunity, man. So every opportunity we are to behave, as we're being taught to behave. You see, we are to display the conduct that's accepted of Yahweh Bashim Al-Shai. And when you keep reading, it says, let your conversation be gracious and attractive so that you will have the right response for everyone. Okay? Because let's say we learn how to maneuver in this wisdom. We learn that there's a level of subtlety to have, but then there's also, a level of authenticity, that we're growing into because we're not performing the authenticity. That's what we're becoming, and people see that. And then in this world, it's so rare to meet someone that's not trying to get over, to meet someone, all right, that's not, all right, trying to manipulate. Okay, it's a rare thing to meet people like that in this world, man. And people are shocked at that, man. You see, you look at our forefathers, man, the reason that kings trusted them to be around them, man, because everyone else was manipulative and out for self, and the king couldn't really trust them niggas like that, but they could trust them certain Israelite men. You go into your Daniel, your Nehemiah, your Tobit, okay? Ezra, these men were around, the courts of kings, and they was trusted, Let's go here. And I want to get an account. Goddamn bird right there. So I want to get an account that goes into that. All right. This is the book of Acts. Yeah, I wrote it down. This is the book of Acts chapter 16. I want to get an account, that shows, all right, high character. This is the book of Acts chapter 6, verse 16. I'm reading NLT. Now it says, one day as we were going down to the place of prayer, we met a slave girl who had the spirit that enabled her to tell the future. She earned a lot of money for her masters by telling fortunes. She followed Paul and the rest of us shouting, these men are servants of the Most High Power, and they have come to tell you how to be saved, because she had a demon on her, but that demon knew, okay, Paul and Silas, that they was prophets, that they was anointed by, the Spirit through Yahweh Shema Shai to teach, salvation. So the demon owner is telling the truth, and it shows you, hey, the spirit, hey, the spirit realm on another frequency, man. Okay, verse 18 said, this went on day after day until Paul got so grieved that he turned and said unto the demon within her, I command you in the name of Yahweh Shah HaMashiach to come out of her. And instantly it left her. Her master's hopes of wealth were now shattered. So they grabbed Paul and Silas and dragged them before the authorities at the marketplace. The whole city, right? I said the whole city is in the uproar because of these Jews. They shouted to the city officials. So her masters, because the demon was off of her, she couldn't fortune tell anymore. Okay? And they was making a lot of money off that. So they're pissed. All right? So they grab up Paul and Silas and they make a fuss about it, man. They bring charges and accusations on Paul and Silas. It says they are teaching customs that are illegal for Romans to practice. A mob quickly formed against Paul and Silas, and the city officials ordered them and stripped and beaten with wooden rods. They were severely beaten, and then they were thrown into prison. The jailers was ordered to make sure they didn't escape, so the jailer put them into the inner dungeon and clamped their feet in stocks. Around midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to the Most High, and the other prisoners were listening. Suddenly there was a massive earthquake, and the prison was shaken to its foundation. All doors immediately flew open, and the chains of every prisoner fell off. The jailer woke up to see the prison doors wide open. He assumed the prisoner had escaped, so he drew his sword to kill himself. Yeah, because if you're the prison guard back then and the prisoners escape, they gonna put you to death. You see? Because by default, it's like, well, nigga, you helped them. How else would they get out? Okay? So back then, you know, you was a prison guard and the prison escaped on your watch, you was getting put to death. Okay? So he's seeing that the door is open. He knows all them gone. You see, and it was the Most High opened the doors, through that earthquake. You see, but in his mind, he like, look, all them gone. You know? So he's like, but Paul shouted to him, stop, don't kill yourself. We are all here. Now remember, it says we are all here. Because as Paul and Silas are singing them songs, everyone is listening. So Paul and Silas, now they have influence in the jail. So Paul, not only did him and Silas not leave, but he stopped everyone else from leaving. The Spirit was on him to stop everyone else from leaving. You know, because he had became an influence. They seen like, what these guys into? You know, so they're praying, they're singing, then they know they're singing in the name, and then the doors open, so everyone knows like, okay, who are these guys? What are they on? All right, and what did Paul use that influence to do? Did Paul use that influence to go and try to beat up the guys that had just beaten him? Because he got a following. Did he take that following to go try to get revenge? No, because he understood that the life of the prison guard was on deck, and it was a Jake. That he knew that the life of the prison guard was at hand, so he was like, "No, well, let's all stay. You know, we all gonna stay in here." You see, so Apostle Paul knew that the Spirit was on him to know that the Lord was working a mighty work. Okay, and it says the jailer called for the lights and ran to the dungeon and fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. Then brought them out and asked, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" You see that? So that high character, the Apostle Paul and Silas showed, that persuaded. So even before the Apostle Paul witnessed Yahushua and began to teach, all right, to this jailer, he was already persuaded. Like, what type of man is this? You see, what do I need to be saved, man? He was already intrigued just by the character of the Apostle Paul, you know. And it says, they replied, believe in the Lord Yahushua and you will be saved, along with everyone in your household. And they shared the word of the Lord with him and with all who lived in his household. Even at that hour of the night, the jailer cared for them and washed their wounds. When a man ways please the Lord, he make even his enemies be at peace with him. Then he and everyone in his household were immediately baptized. He brought them into his house and set a meal before them, and he and his entire household rejoiced because they all believed in the Most High. The next morning, the city officials sent the police to tell the jailer, let those men go. So the jailer told Paul, the city officials have said, you and Silas are free to leave. Go on in peace, man. So they was released anyway. So he took them out, you know, and brought them to his house, cleaned their wounds, fed them. Paul ministered, you know, they went back to, you know, the cell, and the word came in the morning to let them go, man. The Lord, you know, he worked the work. And Apostle Paul showed high character in that moment, man. He wasn't concerned about revenge. You know, he showed consideration for the jailer in that situation, man. And that persuaded, you know, that caught that intrigue, all right, the jailer to, you know, hey, take heed to the ministry, man. You see? So now, man, we ought to walk in truth. You know, we ought to become this thing. We ought to live this thing. We ought to be a billboard for, you know, the truth, man. Not in the sense of performing, but just being what we're becoming. Just being what we're truly being what we're becoming, man. Our authentic, you know, constantly moving in this authentic growth in the truth, man. You know, and it goes a long way because more people watching than we know. You know, whether it's on camera, whether it's in our day-to-day. So, Lord will, you brothers, all right, and you few sisters edified. Till next time I say shalom. Kwame Yasha Allah, Baba, Shalom.